Welcome everybody to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm really excited to have my friend Josh Whelan on today to talk about Google Shopping. Josh does some work with us and our clients, and he also has his own shop called Little Wolf Digital. Josh, welcome to What's Working in E-commerce. How did you get into this, and what do you like doing about this?
So I got my start working in digital marketing for TV news stations, believe it or not, across the country, and I managed 50 different television news stations in different markets, and that was mostly SEO and analytics. So I'm a big fan of data and, understanding your own websites and your own information. So that's kind of where I come from the background. And that led to agency work, and that also led to a number of startups. From working with the startups, I realized that, really, if you know what you're doing and you're passionate about it, you can kind of take control of these kind of things. And Google really lets you do whatever you want to do with it. Google Shopping has a pretty steep learning curve, and Madison is a pretty collaborative environment, and so am I. So I'm always happy to help. And there's a lot of really weird eccentricities that you only really get from working in this industry for 15 to 20 years. So I happen to have it, and I'm happy to help.
Yeah, we're in Madison, Wisconsin, so you're kind of talking about we might even be considered competitors, and yet we cooperate. Is that right?
Exactly. I don't even believe in it. I think that if I've got a question and you need an answer, occasionally I'm going to have issues with social media, email marketing, or something else that I just straight up don't do. And you're an authority on that, and I love working with your entire team. So if I've got a question for one of them, I always know that an answer is going to be good, and they're going to care about what they're doing. And I think that's really what matters. If you care about what you're doing and you know what you're doing, that's more than half the battle.
I think that's a great thing in digital marketing. There is this sort of collaborative attitude. So I'm glad you talked about that. That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about Google Shopping for people who aren't familiar with it or are just sort of diving in. What is it? Why do it? And kind of what are the steps to get started?
I personally love Google Shopping. It's actually my favorite thing that Google does. And the reason that I like that is because it's the most straightforward thing that Google pay-per-click or search engine marketing offers. Unlike traditional search or display ads, for example, you don't need to worry about what your keywords are. You don't need to worry about what your ads are, what they say. It's pretty straightforward. If you have a website and you're advertising products, or you have products on a website, you should be experimenting with Google Shopping. Getting it set up can be a bit of a beast. But once it's taken care of, it's mostly just, bid management and keeping control of your budget. But beyond that, if you've got a good site, if your SEO is good, if your site is fast and that kind of thing, it's really kind of a no-brainer. Google Shopping is probably the best thing that an e-commerce retailer could be doing.
If you've got products on your site, you should be experimenting with this channel. When you say do a test, what's a good time frame or what's a good budget to test with to see if this is a good channel?
That is kind of an interesting question. I mean, the process is always the same. I believe in basically four things. I believe in building, testing, optimizing, and then scaling. So as long as you're ready at each one of those phases, you should be fine. And generally, it's as much trouble to set up, say, 10 products as it is to set up 1,000 products. So there's no reason once you have your shipping set up and once you have all of your general settings set up, just to start experimenting with that and then scaling from there. The most important thing is to have data. As long as you have sales data coming through, and as long as you're able to see it in your analytics, for example, and your Google Ads account, as long as it's accurate and you know what you're looking at, honestly, any test you do is a successful test. If you spend a certain amount of money and you don't get any sales, then that doesn't work. Try something else. If you have spectacular success, you want to just grow that as fast as possible. Scale down what doesn't work and scale up what does. So there really is no wrong kind of test, whatever you're comfortable with. And again, it's as much trouble to do a small test as it is to do a large test. So just jumping into it is probably the best way to go.
You either win or you learn. That's a good attitude as well. Talk to me about account structure. You kind of mentioned the feed. We get the feed set up. I think Shopify makes that really easy. So that's beautiful. WooCommerce to a lesser degree, there's plugins and things that can help you. Assuming we've got the feed set up, Google Ads account is connected to your Google Shopping feed, right? Your Google Merchant Center, right? Once that's done, what should the account structure look like? How do you think about those campaigns?
Sure. So there's really a million different ways of doing it. It's going to be different for every account and for every campaign, really. But I think at its core, you just want to start simple. Basically, one feed, one campaign, and one ad group is probably really all you need for the most part, until you get more, complicated further down the road. More optimization leads to different kind of structures. But the main thing you want to do is have one thing where you can say, this is my budget, this is how much I'm spending overall, and then this is how much I'm spending per product. So what you want to do is have one feed, one campaign, one ad group, but then you're subdividing your ad group. And you're dividing it basically by the products that you have. So if you have 10 different products, if they each have a different price point, for example, you want to bid a different amount on each one of those. So maybe a 5-cent bid is good enough on one of your products, but it's not good enough on all of your products. You want to be able to control your budget overall to make sure that you're profitable and you're spending the right amount, but you want to scale it to each individual product because you don't want to spend, for example, you don't want to bid more than your product is worth. If I have a $5 bike chain, for example, I don't want to bid, $2 or $3 on that because there's no way that's going to be profitable. Usually you want to keep your costs low, and then the more you learn about the account, that's when you'll increase your spend. But generally keeping it as simple as possible is the best way to start.
And sorry if I missed this, but sometimes it is appropriate to have multiple feeds. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can do a number of things. WooCommerce is generally pretty easy. You mentioned Shopify is easy too. You can also do a manual feed. You can do like a Google a Google spreadsheet is a good way to go as well. So I have a couple of clients I'm working with right now that have thousands of products, and they entered them all in by hand into a spreadsheet. So that's all available, and you can do that too. It's certainly not the easiest way to do it, but if you're on WooCommerce or Shopify or Magento or BigCommerce, for example, they all have plugins that make it a lot easier for you. So generally just getting your feed into Merchant Center any way you can is the best way to do it. If you have to resort to doing it by hand, you certainly can, but there's really no benefit in having a manual feed unless you're optimizing everything in it by hand, and that is an awful lot of work. I do have another client that I've been working with, one of my first clients ever. They only have 10 products, and I was able to go in and optimize each one of their items in their feed by hand, and the results have kind of shown that that was the right thing to do. So although their product page isn't perfect, you can basically skip the product page and do that all by hand if you want to, and you can optimize without even touching the product page, which is nice.
In terms of having multiple feeds, one client, there's not a good reason to necessarily do that.
I would say no. I mean, the client that I'm thinking about actually has one feed for every product category they have, and I don't think that's necessary.
Before we jump in, I know you've got some stuff you want to show us, Josh. I'm really excited to see it. I'm excited to learn from you, and I know the audience will be as well. What's the difference between search and shopping? And then do you ever run search ads on the same keywords you would run Google Shopping ads with?
Mostly the reason that I love Google Shopping especially is because it's not just one thing, it's part of an entire strategy. So if you're doing Google Shopping and you're doing Google Search and you're doing SEO and you're doing email or social, the keywords and the data that you get from your customers in Google Shopping can be used to make everything else better. So it's not just one single thing. It's not just I'm trying to get the sale. I'm also trying to get information about my customers, about the industry, about everything else. So that's kind of the best way that I look at it, at least. So if I'm running a regular search campaign, I think those are more for like brand awareness to some extent. They are great for getting people to your site in general, just getting as many people there as you can, and then hopefully they buy something. That would be great. With that sort of thing, I normally go off of two things. I go off of the quantity of the traffic coming in and then the quality of that visit. So if you're getting a ton of people coming through, but they only stay on the site for a second or two, that's not very good. But if you're getting people to go to your site and stay on for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, even if they don't buy anything, they're still showing interest in your product. So that's valuable from a search perspective. You're building an audience. And then in theory, when they're ready to finally buy something, shopping is an e-commerce platform. So they'll search for it, they'll see familiar with you anyway, and hopefully they'll buy on that platform. So it helps everything else. And then if you want to tie in social or email marketing or even display ads, the more people you get to your site, you can set up things like remarketing ads and audiences that send your ads to those people again and remind them of your services. It's entirely holistic. One thing helps something else, helps the other thing. And if you do well in search or you do well in SEO, it'll all basically feed itself. So it's fuel and it fuels everything else.
Kind of a virtuous cycle. We've certainly seen that with clients where search is the first touch. Maybe it's a search ad, maybe it's a shopping ad. Then they get remarketed on Facebook and Instagram, and then maybe they get on the email list and finally buy from an email. So I think the channels definitely play together, and that's great. One thing I wanted to throw in too, just from my experience, that threw me after years of doing search ads and then trying to do shopping ads, I was kind of looking for, where do we put in the keywords? Where do we write the ads? And you really don't get that level of control. That all sort of lives in the feed. Is that right?
Exactly. That's the benefit too, because you don't need to worry about what keywords you're using or what match type you're using. All you need to do is have an optimized product page, which you should have anyway. But on the flip side, what I will say is that if you don't have an optimized page and you don't have good site speed, your SEO isn't very good, then there's a good chance that shopping won't be as effective as it should be. What I would say is, if you are not ready for prime time, there's no sense in paying to send people to your product pages or even your homepage, because there's not a very good chance they're going to convert or buy something. So if you have a great working site and you want to amplify your sales, then shopping is a great channel for that.
What, in terms of being ready for prime time, what does that mean? It sounds like usability, it looks good on mobile, you can buy easily. And then you mentioned SEO as well. Kind of how does that relate to Google Shopping?
The way that shopping is set up, and you've probably seen this before with shopping listings, you basically have your title, which is the name of the product. And normally that gets usually about 100 characters or so is pretty good. And Google uses that, and it also uses the description on your product page to determine when to show up in an ad. So unlike traditional search, where you have keywords that you're feeding Google and you have ads that you make that involve those keywords and things, in shopping's case, it just pulls all your keywords directly off of your page and uses those to determine where to show. So if you have engaging copy, if you have great keyword density in your headline, if you have like your product like size and color and shape and whatever in your headline, then Google knows exactly when to show. But if you just have, these are my gloves 01 or whatever as your title on your website, it's not going to have very good SEO for one thing, and it's also not going to perform very well in shopping ads, for example, because there's not a lot of keywords for Google to grab onto.
That's how SEO fits in. That's great.
Right.
Just for folks watching this, I've seen Josh just work miracles inside Google Shopping accounts where things were never profitable. Suddenly they were profitable, and then they were really profitable where he scaled them up. So I want to ask a little bit, Josh, of how do you do that? And so I think my question is, how do you optimize over time? For ad accounts, for our clients, we often think, how do we reach profitability first if they haven't had a profitable return on ad spend or cost per acquisition, right? Once you've done that, how do you scale up and get even better results and increase spend and increase sales?
Before I get into sharing the account things, my basic core message, if I say nothing else during this whole conversation, what I want to say, three things. I want to say, one, don't trust Google. Don't trust Google. Number two, know your data. And number three, do your own work. That is just the core philosophy that I've got with all this stuff. Mainly, I'll say don't trust Google because there are a lot of automated features that Google allows you to have, and they're pushing every day to have you use more and more automated features. So we'll get into that as we go. But what I've found is the more automation you use, the less control you have, obviously, but the less profitable you also tend to be because you have money and time and expertise involved, obviously. And in a perfect world, you'd be able to control everything, by hand, and you'd have time to do that. But what I've found is there are sneaky things going on behind the scenes that are basically taking your profitability. And I've had clients that have worked directly with Google before that had like an advisor essentially for a year or two, and they were getting a negative return on ad spend. They would spend $1 and they would make 50 cents. And that was going on for years. And they didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Now, what I try to do generally is get a much better return. I don't even bother with optimization and that sort of thing, unless I'm getting at least a 300% return to 500% return. That's mostly just because if you have all of Google's settings on and you're flooring it, you're going to spend a ton of money, but you won't necessarily, make a lot of returns. So make sure that it's profitable. And also, in order to figure that out, you have to know your data, understanding your analytics, understanding your search terms, knowing how to use those search terms, when to block them, and when to get better responses from that. That's where the optimization comes in. And in order to do that, you have to do your own work. So you can't have automated things set up to do that. You can't just set it and forget it. It's the kind of thing where if you want to optimize, you're going to have to know your customer, you're going to have to know your search terms and how to optimize the good stuff and how to get rid of the bad stuff.
as an agency, we get calls almost every week from Google telling us to spend more money or change our bidding strategies. And to your point, we've really stopped listening because it's never been good advice. They seem to have these cheap subcontractors or something who are just trying to get you to spend more money, and it's not driving results. So I'm glad you bring that up. Also, the suggestions inside the account, it'll say, do you automatically want to do this? And those are often not good suggestions. Is that right?
Yeah, I've almost never done that. I think that recently Google mentioned an optimization score. They have a little factor now that says out of 100%, how optimized is your account? And what I've found is that's, do you have all the bells and whistles turned on? And that's not, are you going to get a good response or not? That's just, are you doing everything you could possibly do to spend money with Google? But I would say if you have a small budget, that's fine. If you can spend, $5 a day, $10 a day, but if you can turn that into $100 a day, if you spend, your $10 and make $100, that's a really profitable campaign, and you're not spending very much. And that's how you would scale up. But if you're spending it on, websites that aren't very good, display campaigns that are showing on, foreign language sites or known spam sites, all you're doing is you're taking that money and just giving it to Google. Google doesn't care if you sell your stuff or not. They care that you're paying to get clicks.
Let's take a look into this account and see, can we just watch over your shoulder? How do you optimize a campaign? What metrics do you look at? And then how do you drive results, Josh?
So my favorite thing in the world is Google Analytics. So this is an account that we are working on at Caravan Digital, and I'm just looking at the last year, for example. So what I look at is really only a few things. All I really want to know at the top level is essentially where people are coming from. What is their source, their default channel grouping? And for the purposes of this conversation, we're looking at paid search. So what I want to know is the quantity of the people who went to the site, and then the quality of the visit. What you're looking at is how many people went there, and then you want to know your bounce rate, your pages per session, your session duration, and then your conversion rate, obviously, and then your revenue. For the purposes of this exercise, I want to look at Google Ads. We've been doing most of the work with Google Shopping. If I go there and break it down that way, what you're looking at essentially is your spend, which is the cost for the entire year, and then you have the revenue that you've made for the entire year. So that's really it. So where is your profitability? What is your conversion rate? And ultimately, what is your return on ad spend? And that's kind of the main thing. So if I go into analytics and I look at my ROAS, this is, I think, when we started, and this is kind of where the return on ad spend has been creeping ever since. So what I want to see is a return on ad spend, in the 600 or 700 area. So that's just the growth that we're kind of talking about from when the campaign launched.
That data available by default, everybody should be able to look at ROAS like this?
It's available by default in Google Analytics, but of course you have to have it set up. Bottom line, if you don't know how much you're spending and you don't know how much you're making, there's no way to optimize an account. It's just not possible. So this is kind of what I was talking about before. You have your Google Ads set up. You have a couple of other campaigns set up as well. This is a search campaign, so we'll ignore it for now. Looking at just their Google search. So I have one campaign, essentially. I'm not entirely sure what this is, so I'll ignore it for now because I didn't set that up. So I have one campaign, and this is something else. I think it's a test, so I'll ignore that too. Essentially, it's one campaign, one ad group. But if you go into the ad group, it's broken down by products, and you'll see that in just a second. So in this case, what I have is probably thousands of products. Let me just double check real quick. Yeah, so I have 9,285 total products. And then each one of them has a different cost and a different conversion value per cost. And there's just some data that you want to see here. Essentially, what you'd want to know is what your bid is. And then you'd also want to know how much you're spending in general, and then how much you're making in general. Yeah.
With that many products, in this case, is every product variant, every variation of a product is kind of listed as a separate one? Is that right with these SKUs?
Right. So that's where the profitability comes from. Basically, what you want to do is if you have one product line that's successful, it's possible that every variant, every color, every size, every shape may not be. So you'll have a different bid depending on what that product actually is. So if I have, for example, they sell cancer awareness products. For example, they sell like wristbands, t-shirts, hats to raise money for people surviving cancer, their families, that kind of thing too. It's possible that a certain form of cancer doesn't sell t-shirts as because it's not as common as cancer, for example, or a certain size t-shirt doesn't sell as well. So an extra large t-shirt might have a different price point than a small t-shirt or a baby t-shirt or or whatever. So you want to bid a different amount on each one of those things, and splitting it out by the actual product groups allows you to do that.
Conversion value over cost, that is the same as ROAS, right?
Exactly, right. And that's what I normally do. So when I'm looking at an account from a top level, what I really want to see is really only a few things. I want to know, how many impressions did I get? How often did it show up? I also want to know how much we're spending overall, which is your cost, your conversion value, obviously too. But then you also want to know what your ROAS is, and that's essentially here. So you'll notice that each one of these products has its own cost and its own value, but it also has its own cost per conversion, or ROAS, essentially. So this product, for example, has a 17.4 times ROAS. So for every dollar you're spending, you're making 17.40, which is great. This one is 6, this one is 2.5. So it's going to vary, obviously. And these are the products that have sold, which is great. So you just want to keep track of that.
You were kind of juicing the results on what's working. If that one's got 17.4, how do we put more to that? Is that right?
Right. So this is actually where I'm going to sort of step back a little bit on my initial my initial statement that you shouldn't trust Google and you should do all the work yourself. This account, because it's so large and there are 9,000 different products involved, at some point I've allowed automation to take over, and I've started doing some tests with it. So everything else about the account is still manual. The only thing that I'm allowing Google to do is control the bidding. So right now it's using automated bidding. So what that does is it takes the sales data that you have and it uses that sales data to determine what your bid should be in the future. And so it scales that bid up or down depending on your performance and a number of other factors. The trouble with that, though, is if you don't have reliable sales data first, it doesn't know what to bid. So you can't just start out in an automated bidding campaign and just assume that Google knows what to do, because you'll get wild bids. For an account this large, it just gets easier after some time, after some reliable data, to automate the bidding process. It allows you to focus on other things other than just your daily up 2 cents, down 2 cents kind of bidding.
So the target ROAS 600%, that's kind of our bidding strategy right now inside this campaign. Is that right?
Right. So it's one of the settings that you have available. You can bid on ROAS. I've set 600% as the ROAS amount. And what Google will try to do is adjust to that. And I found it's generally pretty accurate. But again, it's all depending on sales data. So if I don't have reliable sales data, or if it's something like a seasonal product, for example, if you're trying to sell umbrellas or something during the winter when you're not going to get a lot of rain, the conversion value and the cost per click is going to be different during your busy season than it is during your slow season.
And I'm sure people are watching this wondering, okay, we got 6x, how do we get 12x? Can you just crank it up to 1200 target ROAS? What happens if you did that suddenly?
The way that I look at it, at least, is that the ROAS is a very important number, but it's not the only number. If, for example, I'm spending 1 penny and I'm making, $10 on that sale, that's huge. But that's also not really realistic, because if my ROAS were the only metric I cared about, then just getting the best return, spending absolutely the least possible and making absolutely the most possible would be the most important thing. But in this case, you also want to get as much revenue as you can out of it. So you need to find a more reasonable revenue amount, and you want to find what your acceptable ROAS is, where you're basically getting as many sales as you possibly can for as little as you can, but that large revenue amount is still one of the most important numbers you're going to be looking at. So if you're only getting a couple of sales, but it's a penny or two for a bid, that's not really significant. If you're getting a really great revenue, but it's at a kind of a middling ROAS, like around a 300 or 400%, you still want to get a much larger revenue, but you do want to reduce your cost as much as you can.
So that really speaks to the sales and the scaling piece. If you set it up to 1400 ROAS, it might be able to give you that, but it would spend less, and ultimately your sales and even your profits could be lower.
It would hurt your sales, right? Because it would expose your ads to fewer people, because it's not concerned about making you money anymore. It's not concerned about getting sales anymore. It's concerned about keeping its costs down. And that's two different things. Generally believe that your account and your ROAS will never be perfect, but it can always be better. So if I'm getting a 300% ROAS and I do some things and make some optimization changes 1 month, next month, maybe it's 310, maybe it's 400, maybe it's 500. As long as you're still getting good sales and your revenue is still solid, then you want to constantly improve your ROAS over time. And that's just what optimization is all about. That's also what scaling and what dividing your products by variations is about. Because again, you want profitability depending on those variations. And that's where your optimization comes in.
Is there other pieces of optimization you want to walk us through of kind of how you look at this when you're in this account?
So one of the things we did with this account was a negative keyword list. So if you go into your data and you look at your analytics and you look at the search terms that people are using to get to the site, you have a number of products that came through and you can see which search terms people used to get there. So "No one fights alone" is a slogan that they have. They sell bracelets. In this case, we spent $73 and we made $600. So I know that this is a great keyword. On the other hand, if someone is searching for something like Alzheimer's bracelets or Alzheimer awareness t-shirts, they don't do that. So what I'd want to do is go into Google Ads and I'd want to go into account settings and I want to go into negative keyword list. And these are keywords that apply to every single ad that's in the account because I never want to show up for Alzheimer's ever because we just don't sell those products. So I don't want to spend money on those. So these are search terms that have come up in analytics over time, and I know that they don't convert, they don't have sales. So I'm able to block these. I believe this list is probably several hundred items long, but that's part of where the optimization comes in. So every month, what you'd want to do is find the search terms that are the most expensive, that are getting a lot of attention, but aren't necessarily selling anything. And then you want to block them from the account so that you don't waste money on this anymore. And the benefit of using Google Shopping in conjunction with something like Google Search is if you do have search terms here that I know are selling well, like the thyroid cancer ribbon, for example, or the what cancer cannot do, if I have search campaigns running alongside of this, I can say, oh, you know, this is a good search term for me. I can add that. Or bladder cancer ribbon, for example, is a good keyword. So I can add that to my search account. So good sales in shopping lead to good sales and good traffic in search.
One thing that I've found challenging coming from search and going to this is often in search, I'll look at impression share and I see a client has a profitable campaign going, but they're only 25% impression share, meaning they could show up, 3 times more. Like there's a lot more searches they could be showing up for and they're not. With search, I just say, increase the daily budget. How much are we spending per day, right? What I've seen, at least so far, is that's not necessarily the same in Google Shopping. Can you talk about that?
The budget for Google Shopping really only matters if it's an automated campaign. So if it's manual, your budget is just a ceiling. And if it's automated, your budget is what Google's going to try to spend throughout your entire day.
Just to kind of put it in a bow then, so this client spent $1,200, they made $7,600, that's 6x. How do we double that spend so that we get more sales here?
What I would say is, I think you mentioned also that the search impression share was kind of a concern. So in this case, what we're looking at is a search impression share around 30%, which I'd say is probably pretty healthy because generally, as with Google Search, you don't necessarily always want to be in the first position. The first position tends to be the most expensive position, and that's true for search and for display and for shopping as well. You want to be in the position that's as most profitable for you as possible. So you want to show up as close to the top of the ratings as you can, but it has to be profitable for you to do that. If I'm seeing 30%, that's not terrible, but you'll notice that if I go into each individual product, they have their own search impression share for each one of these. So again, if you're doing this on an automated system, you don't have any control over that. All you can really do if it's automated is just increase your budget and just keep going and going and going. And hopefully it turns out. The only 2 knobs you really have with an automated bidding strategy are increasing your budget or adjusting your ROAS. And that's it. So if I want to tell a client that I want to improve their revenue and their return on ad spend, if all I can do is spend more from a budget perspective or adjust their ROAS, there's not a lot of control there. But if I want to improve their ROAS, because it's all based on your sales data anyway, if I see that this is only at less than 10% of your impression share, I would say they're getting a really decent conversion value. For example, they've only spent 18 cents. This is a bit ridiculous, I guess, but they've sold that for $2,000. That's huge. So if this is manually controlled, I would say 18 cents is way too low to bid on that. Let's bid double that. Let's bid 50 cents or whatever and see where it goes. But you have to be able to control that in your account and do your own work. to make that change. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to scale. But that's where it is. So you look at each one of your products, each one of your product variations, and then see what your conversion value per cost is, and then what your bid is. And then if you're doing it manually, you can increase that. And that's where your scaling, that's where optimization comes in.
That's the piece that threw me, is because in the world of search, I generally would not increase a manual CPC bid, a cost per click bid, to try to get more impression share. That might happen, but in general, the lever in my mind is we increase the daily spend, and that's what's going to increase the impression share, but that's not the case in shopping. Is that right?
It may have no connection at all to your performance or your impression share.
You've mentioned a little bit, I think, about smart shopping versus full Google shopping. What's the difference, and which one should people try?
To talk about smart shopping is it's interesting. So it's along the lines of my core philosophy, and you'll probably understand why I feel the way that I do about smart shopping after having heard me talk for the last 10 minutes. But the idea is that you want to control your own account, you want to make sure you don't trust Google, and you want to make sure you do your own work. So all of those things, smart shopping does not allow you to do. So smart shopping does the same sort of thing that you're looking at for automated bidding, for example, but it also forces you to participate in places you don't want to be. Smart shopping, for example, turns on search partners, which is Google's kind of lower quality search network. And it also turns on a lower quality display network as well. Would you like to know where those ads are? Would you like to know what landing pages those display ads are showing up? Would you like to know what search terms people use to get to the site? Everyone would. You can't. Smart will not let you do that. You get literally no data out of smart shopping. You have to trust Google because they're Google. You can't do any of the work yourself. If you want to make it better, you can't. You have no control over it whatsoever. You can't block bad keywords. You can't adjust your bids. You can't do any optimization work. So whatever you put in is whatever you get out of it. What I would say is the last thing about smart shopping is that it's also kind of hard to get off of because the performance actually isn't that bad, and that's part of the issue. So you will tend to get a decent return on ad spend, and if you don't have a lot of time and you don't really want to spend a lot of effort, it is a shortcut to get pretty okay performance, but there's no way you can scale any kind of performance with it.
Take us through it again, just high level. What should people know? What should they make sure to do or not do? And then how can people find you?
What I would say is get started. If you have any concerns or if you have any questions, the answers are available. They're available either through partners, people you know, people like Egan and Caravan Digital, or just on the web. Most of the stuff that I've done has been self-trained. I've been doing it for over 15 years. And a lot of it is like the process is essentially, hey, let me Google that for you. But once you make that mistake once, you'll hopefully never make it again. So what I would say is people have been doing this for a very long time. And if you have any issues from shopping or search or really anything involving Google at all, you can probably find the answers. So be curious, keep at it. You're going to make mistakes. Mistakes are good because they lead to solutions. The second thing I will say is don't trust Google. Google wants you to make mistakes, and they want you to not know you're making mistakes. So know your data. If you make a mistake, find that mistake. Find it in analytics, find it in Google Ads. Make sure that you know you made a mistake and make sure you never do it again. And then lastly, of course, do your own work so that if you do make a mistake on your own, you can correct it and you can hopefully never do that again because you are the one who's in control of your accounts. If you can just make things a little bit better every day, if you can make your account 1% better every day, you're going to have a profitable business, whether that's in consulting or in retail e-commerce. Just making your account 1% better every day is possible. And it's just a question of getting in there, understanding stuff, and then doing the work.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing, Josh. And thank you also for optimizing Caravan Digital's client accounts. We will have to have you on another time. So thank you.